Hello, Internet. This is Matthew, and welcome to the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. This is not, as you might suppose, a podcast about surviving the zombie apocalypse. If that happens, all hope is lost, and you should run into the horde of zombies. That's at least what I would do in that same scenario, because I have no chance of surviving the zombie apocalypse whatsoever. No, this is a podcast in which a variety of subjects are examined using philosophy in the hopes of gaining greater insight and perspective. This podcast won't solve all your problems, but it will make you think. Your mileage may vary. Normies not allowed. Okay, so episode 3 of the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. Today I don't have a script or an essay to read. Today I'm going to be talking extemporaneously about a YouTube video that I saw recently. I have a good deal of notes, so I won't be rambling too much. There's always a bit of rambling when Matthew's involved, but I think that makes me and the podcast more interesting. So I'm not gonna apologize for my rambles. Before I get started, I want to thank my friend John Rittenau. I hope I pronounced your name right. For introducing this video to me. And I also want to thank up front my other friend Keegan, also known as Essential Salts, for talking about some criticisms he had of this video that made me think more about my own criticisms of the video, and he just overall contributed to my understanding of and thought process surrounding the arguments made in the video. So again, thank you guys. The video itself was uploaded in 2016 by the YouTube channel CGB Gray. It is titled The Rules for Rulers, and it has over 13 million views. And when I started watching this video, or when I started watching this video, when John recommended it to me, I was like, that doesn't sound that like interesting. Like I already had a mildly, I don't know if cynical or pessimistic. I never know if cynical is the right word or pessimistic is the right word. But I always had a realist, I think, understanding of politics. I was never really under any illusions about the nature of power. But then I watched the video, and I still felt like I had been too naive and too optimistic in my understanding of politics. But I want to leave most of those criticisms and most of that commentary to the end. Right now I will go over Gray's main points. So yeah, the whole premise of the video can really be summed up in one phrase: no man rules alone. And it sounds so obvious as to not even warrant discussion. But in political science or history classes, you've heard about one-man rule or like absolute monarchy, or we've heard horror stories of brutal dictators in various parts of the world who did terrible things. And of course, Americans, for example, are quick to assert their superiority, their cultural superiority over, say, one-man rule. The whole point of the American Revolution was to get away from monarchy, and even though people are pretty disgusted with the U.S. government these days, I don't think you're going to run into too many people who are going to defend one-man rule. And again, there's this assumption that, this country has a lot of problems, but at least we're not North Korea. At least we're not the Soviet Union. At least we're not Pol Pot's Cambodia, Mao's China, Castro's Cuba, etc., etc., etc. At least we have more representation. At least we're not at the whims of one man. But even in those countries where there is one man in charge of the whole show, there really isn't one man in charge of the whole show. That's the thing. To have one person in power, there have to be people working for him to do what it is he wants done. If that's a grammatically correct statement. You need people to do what it is he wants to get done. A king's power is the ability to get people to act on his thoughts. So if the king wants a road built, a road is built. If a king wants to expel this group from the country, that group gets expelled from the country. If people support him, if he has the keys to power, if he has key supporters. I'll be using that phrase a lot in this podcast. And when I mean key supporters, I'm of course referring to local leaders, bureaucrats, politicians, police chiefs. I'm referring to all the, from the highest positions of government to the lowest positions of government. The king needs friends. The king needs loyal lackeys. So that's rule number one. There are 3 rules overall that Gray goes over. Rule number 1, get the key supporters on your side. And for now, I'm gonna focus on monarchies / dictatorships. The video is split into a section about one-man rule, and the second part is about representative democracies. But a lot of the rules apply a lot of the same rules apply in both systems. In a one-man rule scenario, that one man needs fewer key supporters than does a representative in a republic. Kim Jong-un needs less key supporters than Bernie Sanders, for the very reason that that he has more authority than Bernie Sanders. Rule number 2 is related to what the king's main responsibility is, because of course, again, the scenario, or not the scenario. What comes to mind when people think about kings? Again, particularly in the United States, are people who do whatever they want. They can do anything. They can be greedy, selfish, murderers. It doesn't matter. They can go crazy. They're just kind of these evil people who act on their whims all the time. But they actually have one key responsibility, according to Gray, and that is rule number 2: control the treasure, and distribute resources to yourself and the keys properly in order for your rule to be stable. So the king's main responsibility then is to, just to reiterate, properly handle his money, or the country's money, the kingdom's money, if you want to think about it like that. He can't just sit on his butt all day, do absolutely nothing. He has to decide where the money in the treasury is going to go, and what he or his lackeys are gonna do with it. It's almost like running a business. Government and business, they're not that different in many ways. So if you're a fairly optimistic person, such as myself, you might imagine in a scenario where, okay, what would I say? Or you might think to yourself, what would I do if I were king? Because all of us kind of subconsciously believe Gore Vidal when he said, all the world's problems would be solved if everyone just did as I advised. So if only people listened to us, if only we had ultimate control, if only we were the king or the emperor or the president or the prime minister or whatever, this country wouldn't be so rotten. But according to Gray, it does not follow, therefore, that what you do as king or dictator is give a bunch of money to the people. Give as much money to the people as possible, because the peasants and the artisans, they need it, and you as a benevolent king want to provide for your subjects. You want to do the right thing. You want to do the moral thing. You don't want to be a capricious king who doesn't care about anybody in your kingdom. You want everyone to have their wants and needs. You want everyone to have as good a life as they can. And so Gray is saying, no, don't do that. That is a misunderstanding of your authority as king or dictator. And why is that? This is because you are encouraging your rivals. and you're encouraging your rivals because of rule. No. I'm getting ahead of myself. I was making sure I was on track with the rules. You're encouraging your rivals because whatever money you give to the people, you're not giving to your key supporters. And it's very important that you give money or treasure to your key supporters. That is what they are looking for. That is why they are loyal to you. They're not loyal to you because you're such a great guy and you're so hilarious and you're so intelligent and you're so kind, and you're just a best friend. Like, they know you're king. They know you could cut their head off at any moment, but you're just such a great guy, and that's why they're loyal to you. No, says Gray. They're loyal to you because of what you can do for them. When you're the king, and if they're if they're working for you, you can get them, property. You can get them money. You can get them basically whatever is in your power to get. And so they are constantly, the keys are constantly assessing whether you're serving their interests and whether you're satiating their desires. And when you decide to be the benevolent monarch that gives a bunch of money to the peasants, then your rival, might have a secret meeting, say, with a few of your keys, and he'll say, "Look at what the king is doing. He's giving all that money to those nothings. He's giving all that money to those people who don't mean a damn thing. They don't matter. They're working in the fields. They're working in the mines. We matter. We, the people within the government, the people with the power, we matter. You matter. You guys matter. The key supporters matter. And if you help me overthrow the king, and install me in his place, I will be sure that the money that is going to the common man, the rabble, goes to you. Your wealth will increase if we get rid of the king and stop him from being so generous with the treasury. It is not his job to help his people. It is his job to keep us happy. Or it is his job to keep you happy. It is his job to keep the key supporters happy. So don't do that. Don't help people. Be as cold and ruthless of a monarch as you're humanly able to do. Be as cold. Find the balance between being a cold monarch and sleeping well at night. If you can do that, you're in the clear. If you can do that, and only concern yourself with helping your key, or maintaining your the loyalty of your key supporters, even at the expense of the rabble, then you can sleep well at night. And then there's that. Generous works aren't going to get you very far as king. And then rule number 3 is minimize key supporters. And this is just basic mathematics. The more key supporters you have, the more people whose interests you have to serve. And the more people, and as the number of people whose interests you have to serve increases, your ability to serve those interests decreases. Partly because of the number of people, and partly because many of the interests of your key supporters will be in conflict, and so you have to balance out all those interests and weigh the pros and cons, and try to keep everybody as content as possible. This is why, for example, when a dictator, when there's a revolution and the new dictator is placed into power, he'll kill some of the revolutionaries, some of his fellow revolutionaries. He'll kill some of the people that helped him into power, and often he'll replace them with some people who are already in power. So some people who were key supporters of the previous dictator or monarch, and that's because he's trying to minimize the people he needs to support him, and also it's not guaranteed that these revolutionaries will know what they're doing when it comes to practical politics. They might be good at guerrilla warfare. They might be good at writing, beautifully crafted pamphlets that rally up the people. They might not be good at paperwork. They might not be good at making sure there's enough food to go around, or they might not be good at crafting the best possible economic policy, or they might not know much at all about foreign policy. I'm going on a bit here, of course. So I think that goes into the first half of the video. If I may reiterate the rules quickly so we're all on the same page. Rule 1, get the key supporters on your side. Rule 2, control the treasury and distribute resources to yourself and the keys properly in order for your rule to be stable. And 3, minimize key supporters. Trying to think. I don't think there's anything else I have to say about Rule 3. It's fairly self-explanatory. So yeah, I think I can move on from there. There's an obvious objection that someone watching that video might have to the first half, which is, well, I don't live in a monarchy. I don't live in a dictatorship. I live in a republic. And so I don't want to become dictator of the United States. I want to become a senator. I want to become a representative. I want to become the president. I want to go into politics and represent the people. I recognize that in monarchies and in dictatorships, it's all about a disgusting power struggle. But in representative democracies, it's different because the people have a say. The people are the ones that elect you, and so the people, you are more answerable to the people than Louis XIV was, or than Joseph Stalin was. Actually, if I may backtrack here for a second, to give an example of a dictator that was attempting to minimize his key supporters, you can look at the Soviet Union, because Joseph Stalin, he got rid of Trotsky, he got rid of Bukharin, Mikhail Bukharin. He got rid of many of his fellow revolutionaries who had helped bring the Soviet Union into existence and had worked intimately with Lenin. So you can look at that and say it's not just about Stalin being a bloodthirsty psychopath, although there is that, but he was attempting to minimize his key supporters in order to consolidate his rule. And everyone knows that, say, Trotsky and Stalin were not terribly friendly with one another. They weren't. Trotsky wasn't Stalin's biggest fan, and Stalin wasn't Trotsky's biggest fan. So that's just a tangible historical example that makes the third rule more apparent. But anyway, so representative democracies. The thing about a romanticized view of representative democracies, according to Gray, is the presidents and prime ministers and senators and representatives, they're still in a constant negotiation with key supporters. They're still in that web of entanglements. They don't get away from that just because they were elected, rather than coming to rule by birthright. But of course, it does function somewhat differently. And when I talk about key supporters in a republic, I'm not just talking about fellow politicians. I'm not saying Joe Biden's only key supporters are the vice president and most of the members of the Democratic Party, and probably a few Republicans here and there, maybe for certain key issues. Although I can't really think of who. I'm also talking about voters. But of course, a politician generally can't, someone who's running for president, say, does not have time to talk to, every single person in the country and try to convince them to be a key supporter. Just too many key supporters, and then it's just too much time and effort, and it's just impossible. It wouldn't work. In this context, key supporters are thought they're thought of less as individuals and thought of more as groups. Politicians' key supporters might be the elderly, or they might be young people, or they might be minorities. People that you're trying to get to vote for you, which in effect means they're on your side to some extent. At the very least, it means they are more on your side than on your opponent's side, because they voted for you and not your opponent. And another tangible example of this would be tax codes. So tax codes in the United States, they're just insane. I don't understand taxes. To understand taxes, you really have to dig deep into it. But that's related to the representatives' needs for key supporters, because they're attempting to give tax loopholes and tax breaks and other financial benefits to those voting blocs, to their key supporters. So it's not a coincidence that the United States and other democracies have these complex tax codes. Again, it's a way of bribing people to be your friend. And you can do other things as well. You can make it harder for your political opponents' supporters to vote, because they're not your key supporters. They're against you. So why would you help them? You can draw election borders in such a way so you know, like, okay, I'm always going to win this county. I'm always going to win this county because of how it's drawn. Doesn't matter. I'm always going to win the county. Don't have to worry about that. I can go to other counties because I'm more worried about them. Because I drew the lines on this county and I know I'm going to win this county. Or you can have pre-elections within your party to make sure, or to handpick who your key supporters can vote for. So something that I'm still not over is the fact that in 2016, the Bernie Sanders would have won the Democratic primary if the Democratic Party had not been pulling the strings behind the scenes to make sure that he was not the Democratic person elected within the Democratic primary. They wanted Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton is who they got. They were not going to allow registered Democrats to vote for Bernie Sanders. Still angry about that. Could do a whole podcast on venting my frustration and rage about that if I wanted to. But that's an example. The party handpicked Hillary Clinton, so they say to their key supporters, here, you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. You're not going to vote for any of these other possible candidates. Even if you like them more, you're going to vote for them. You're going to vote for Hillary Clinton because you don't want Trump. Trump's evil. Why would you want Trump? And then, but it's not just voters, of course, that are your key supporters. It's also investors and businessmen. So you might need to create tax loopholes to make sure that certain investors who are supporting you, they get a little they pay fewer taxes than they might have to. It's like, well, they like technically they should pay more than they do, but you pass this law, and this investor happens to support so many of your other colleagues, within or without within your party or even some in another party. So it's like it was easy to get the law passed, and it's like, oh, well, now this investor doesn't pay as many taxes as they might have to, and they're more likely to donate to your campaign, or pass certain laws that these investors or businessmen want passed because it helps them, or offer pardons or just offer other get out of jail free cards if this investor they were doing some shady business. They were doing things that probably weren't legal, making money in immoral ways. But hey, they're your key supporter, and so you're gonna make sure they don't go to jail, or they just have to pay a fine, or at the very least, I suppose their sentence would be lessened to as much their sentence would be lessened as much as possible. You want to make sure that they can do what they want to do, because if they can't, if they're convicted of those financial crimes and rot away in a jail cell, they can't help you. And of course, there's always the possibility of, if you don't help them stay out of jail, they might talk to the media. They might say, this politician, he helped me with this. It's like, I've been, convicted of a couple of these financial crimes. Like, you might want to check this guy out. I don't know if he's as clean as you think he is. So there's that's another reason you might want to give that investor a get out of jail free card. Now, an interesting difference between democracies and monarchies or dictatorships is they pay the people pay lower taxes. Now that might you might not understand that right off the bat, because no one likes taxes. Read my lips, right? It's like no one likes taxes. Everyone wants taxes lowered. Everyone resents paying taxes. But everyone also quotes Benjamin Franklin, who said the only things certain in life are death and taxes. But people, not everyone in the United States pays taxes. If you're extremely poor, the government doesn't ask you to pay taxes, and in fact, they'll probably give you money. So not only are you not paying taxes, the government is giving you money. The government's not going to, just give you money for absolutely no reasons, but we do have a system where where the government does not break down everybody's door and demand taxes, no matter how poor and destitute you are, which is what would be done in a dictatorship. You can literally just march to the peasants' disgusting house that is always falling apart, smash the door in and point a bayonet in their face and say, "Give me money," and they will give you money. It reminds me of in ancient China, how the government convinced people to accept paper money, and what they did is they wrote little notes in the paper money, which say, "If you don't accept this paper money, we will kill you." And if you say, "Do this or die," most people are like, "All right, I'm willing to do business with you," So that's just a funny little anecdote. But this is actually the lower taxes is a deliberate outcome of a representative democracy, because the representatives need less tax revenue to give to their key supporters. Because in a representative democracy, the interests of the representatives often align with the interests of the average person. So taxes are going to roads, hospitals, universities. They're going to all of these things which make people's lives better. Like, it is better for me to be in the United States than North Korea because I am given universities and hospitals and roads, and I'm given more freedoms than I would be. But the caveat here is that the reason the government's collecting less tax revenue to go to these hospitals and roads and universities and whatnot is because these very universities and hospitals and roads are making you more productive. They're making the society as a whole more productive. So these representatives are not giving you all these political freedoms and giving you all these benefits. They're not improving your life because they like you, or they're not improving your life because they're just such great people. They're not improving your life out of the goodness of their soul. They're improving your life because in a representative democracy, the goal is to maximize productivity. And all the freedoms and perks that I've mentioned already do increase productivity. It's better for, from the government's perspective, the economy is better from the government's perspective if you are forced to go to school for a certain amount of time and acquire a certain amount of knowledge, so you can go into certain jobs, which will further, which will be a boom, which will improve the economy significantly. But to compare us to another country, which is on the news often these days, Saudi Arabia. What's the difference between Saudi Arabia and the United States? The difference between Saudi Arabia and the United States is, in the United States, our economy's productivity is based on citizens working. In Saudi Arabia, their wealth is based on oil. So it is very, generally speaking, in countries where wealth is extracted from the ground, in countries where oil or diamonds or gold or other natural resources that can be turned into wealth, if that's the government's main source of revenue, then you're probably going to have a crappier life because the government doesn't need you for productivity. The government can, you are more irrelevant to the government than, say, I am to the U.S. government. A gold mine, you don't have to care about the welfare, say, of the slaves working in a gold mine. A bunch of slaves can die every single day in that gold mine. It doesn't matter. As long as there are slaves, enough slaves, or as long as you can get more slaves somehow, that you'll be able to extract a good bit of wealth from that gold mine. So they don't have to worry about working conditions. They don't have to worry about you unionizing or anything of the sort. This is, of course, why in these dictatorships there are fewer universities and hospitals and roads, because when you give people these perks, when you give people these freedoms, they are more likely to revolt. But if you keep them illiterate, if you keep them uneducated, if you keep them from traveling, or if you make traveling difficult, they're less likely to revolt. But the only reason they would revolt is if the army, so in other words, some of your key supporters let them storm the palace. If the army's on your side, then they'll just crush the armed uprising. Because again, the peasants are nothing. The peasants don't matter. If the army is not on your side, they have no reason. They'll just go off to coffee. They'll just go to lunch and let the peasants storm the palace and kidnap you, torture you, murder you, whatever. And then the army will go in and establish, and whoever's leading the army then, whoever the army is loyal to at that point, will come in and establish him or herself as the new ruler. A ruler that is more willing to serve the court and the key supporters. A ruler that is often worse, or at least equal to the former ruler in cruelty. You have to be ruthless. You have to be ruthless. If you haven't noticed. Gray also has an interesting metaphor where he says there's like two hills and a valley underneath. Not underneath, a valley between these two hills. One hill are dictatorships and monarchies. The other hill are democracies. And he's saying both of these systems are stable. And they're stable because, well, I've already kind of illustrated why dictatorships would be stable. If your wealth is not extracted from the productivity of the average citizen, then it will be stable. Democracies are stable though, because if you revolt in a democracy, you're disrupting productivity. You're not creating more wealth. The government's not getting more wealth out of it. In fact, the government's wealth would decline steadily. And so, many politicians realize that it is not in their best interest to participate in a coup and overthrow the government, because they will likely die, and the conditions of everybody in this country would likely be worse. So an example, and I know this is overused and highly politicized in unhelpful ways by certain people, but when Donald Trump was attempting to maintain the presidency, I think many of his followers, or many of his key supporters within the government, came to realize that it is not in their best interest to fall behind in a Trump coup. Now, of course, many of the Republicans did go along with it, did raise eyebrows about the election, and did not condemn the January 6th uprising. So many of them were still spineless and disgusting, but eventually it all died down and Biden was sworn in, and things have gone basically back to normal. Again, Trump's lackeys realized, like, we're not going to win this ultimately, probably. Even if Trump were to pull a successful coup off, he's so volatile. He's such an angry buffoon. That's just going to disrupt the country and therefore the world, since the U.S. is so important. It just doesn't make sense for us to replace this corporatist republic with a Trumpist monarchy. So the video concludes with Gray saying that, after hearing all this, you're probably a little disillusioned. You're probably like, well, I don't want to go into politics anymore. I changed my mind. I'm going to go do other things, and I'm just going to ignore politics entirely. But Greg adds another caveat, which is you can't avoid politics, because politics means everything from a king or a president or a prime minister to deans and dons and mayors and chairs and chiefs. You are, and he has this quote that stuck with me. And that quote is, "You can't escape structures of power. You can only turn a blind eye to understanding them." And the final thing he said was, there was a rule 0 that he didn't mention at the beginning. And rule 0 is, without power, you can affect nothing. So that was basically his video, his 18-minute video, prolonged to 54 minutes. I recommend you go watch his video. And it was a very good video, CPG Gray. So thank you for uploading it all those years ago. And it was, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I was in shock. I was totally tongue-tied. I had nothing to say. I just stopped watching the video and I just got up from my chair and I felt a degree of emptiness and nihilism wash over me. it was like, oh my God. I always thought that my politicians, or the politicians that were supposedly serving my interests, were only playing a cynical power game. They were only involved in power struggles, and they really didn't care at all about me. And this video only solidified that thought process for me. I felt the hole was pulled over from my eyes, and it made me feel pretty hopeless and lost, you know? I was thinking to myself, oh, so this is it. Here I am, a measly primate who has two options in life. I can either take power and control other primates, or I will be controlled by other primates. Actually, no, that's even a false dichotomy, you see, because even if I am the one in charge of, or even if I am the primate controlling a bunch of other primates, the primates that I am controlling control me. So even the controller is the controlled, and even the controlled are the controllers. It's like the opening of Rousseau's Social Contract, where he says, what is it? Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. I forgot the last part of it. Something about the man who the master considers himself superior to all the rest, but he is actually a greater slave than they. I am paraphrasing, of course. But that was really where the headspace I was in after that video. Now, as I said at the beginning, that there are some points of contention that I think are worth bringing up. Now, one of them is that Gray does not, he takes the humanity out of politics. Sorry, I dropped my pen. He takes the humanity out of politics. Now that's where the Machiavellian jumps in and says, "Ha, you ridiculous classical liberal scum. You think politics is about helping people. Well, it's not. It's all about power. So just you have to get out of that illusion. But that politics is not about power, and the politicians or just rulers in general are not serving their interests." But before I tackle that objection, I'm actually saying something a little different, which is it takes the humanity out of the rulers, or rather, it turns the rulers into cartoonish caricatures. It turns the rulers into these one-dimensional characters in a work of fiction, and it doesn't really take into account the complexities of human nature. And the example that I gave to Keegan was the Clintons. Now, I despise the Clintons for many reasons. Most people do. So I don't even have to explain that. But I could, after watching that video, I could look at their political career and say, oh, that they're all they're concerned about is power. All they're concerned about is keeping and maintaining power. Now they're out of office now, but you know what I mean. And I think that's mostly true. I think the Clintons were mainly concerned with keeping and maintaining power. But that's only one side of the story. And I say that because human beings aren't machines that are programmed to do one thing. You know, we have many desires, many contradictory drives. We're not a unitary being. You know, Jordan Peterson said that the insight of the psychoanalysts was that people were not alone in their heads, that people had other, versions of themselves that took charge in any given situation, and that they were not, their actions could not be explained as one person doing one thing, but many people doing many things, or many people desiring many things. And so I can't say the Clintons are, just machines that are programmed to keep and maintain power. They're people. They're people with contradictory drives. And they're people with value systems. Gray doesn't really seem to take value systems or ideology into account. So like when Hillary Clinton was running for running for president in 2016, I guess we could ask ourselves, did she have an ideology? Did she have a value system? And I think I've probably gone back and forth about this in the past, and I think she's a figure that is willing to be a flip-flopper. She's willing to be very wishy-washy. She wants it both ways. But she follows an ideology and she has a value system. Heck, she even thinks I'm sure she thinks that her political career was spent helping people. I'm sure she thinks that, or at least, well, I'm not. I would assume she thinks that. I would assume that she actually thinks that she was fighting for the common man. And so I don't think Gray's analysis takes that into account. It doesn't take into account the idea that people can be serving ideologies as much as they serve power, or they can be serving value systems as much as they serve power. I mean, if there's a distinction we're making here between ideology and value systems, then I would say Bernie Sanders, who I brought up earlier, he has values, and he tries to stick to those values as much as possible. Now he has become weak-kneed. He has become a lackey of of Joe Biden and of the a centrist wing of the Democratic Party. So he's not going to be that revolutionary figure that we thought he was. I'm sure he'll still do some good things here and there, but I'd say his heydays are long since past. But is he purely serving the interest of power? And does anybody purely serve the interests of power? Does any politician? Is there only reason to get up in the morning to keep and maintain power? And I think I struggle somewhat with this question because, I'm a good man of the Enlightenment. It's a very, very neocon thing to say. Very conservative boomer thing to say. But I am a man. I consider the Enlightenment values to be some of the best values that mankind has created and aspired to. And it seems to me that the whole point of the Enlightenment was really it was the final result, let's say, of Socrates' life. So what was Socrates' whole shtick? Socrates' whole shtick was, don't submit. Don't do it. Just don't. Like, it doesn't matter if it's your family, if it's your friends, if it's an emperor or king, a democratic assembly, a religious sect. Don't submit. You are your reason is what should be guiding you. And if your reason leads you to ideas that contradict authority, then you go against that authority, and you do not fall in line, and you do not go along to get along, because you don't have to. Every individual has this bit of reason in him, Socrates supposed, and so for that very reason, he argued that he argued, well, not even he argued, but he lived as if he believed it. He lived as if he thought that individual human beings could serve a higher purpose. And he was killed for that very reason. He asserted himself against Athenian democracy. And he questioned a lot of the assumptions of his fellow citizens. And he inspired that same kind of questioning in his pupils and his students. And that was not tolerable to the Athenians, so they had to put him to death. And so I think the Enlightenment is an attempt at saying Socrates was right. Don't submit. You don't have to submit to a king. You don't have to submit to the church. You don't have to play into these power games. You don't have to be a master or a slave. Because when you're in a master-slave relationship, and I mean this both literally and metaphorically, it's toxic. It's toxic for the master. It's toxic for the slave. Now, you might prefer to be the master than the slave, but that doesn't mean that it's good to be a master, and that doesn't mean that it's good to be a slave. Or rather, I should say, doesn't mean that it's beneficial to be a master, and it doesn't mean that it's beneficial to be a slave. The whole point is to escape the master-slave dichotomy. The whole point is to not to submit when you don't have to. Retain your integrity as a free man or as a free person. Or what does Voltaire say somewhere? Remember your dignity as a man. Remember your dignity as a man. And so that's where I guess I begin my thought process. And so when people bring up Nietzsche, when people bring up Michel Foucault, and they say, like, oh, look, I mean, I'm sorry, your Enlightenment attitudes, they're just justifications for power. It's power all the way down. And of course, power goes beyond politics in their view, and they would say love is related to power, or love is a power struggle, or when you're in a educational institution, the teacher, your relationship with the teacher is a power struggle. And so their whole point was to try to point out, like, yeah, people aren't necessarily nice and benevolent. People are serving their own material interests. And we need to point that out. If you want to live a more examined life, if you want to recognize how human relations, or if you want to recognize what dictates human relations, So, I guess then at that point, then the question is, well, what am I saying to that? Am I rebutting that? Am I accepting that? And if I rebut that or accept that, what does that mean for how I'm viewing Gray's video and how I'm viewing his analysis of politics and current events? And I suppose I accept it as, in some way, a historical inevitability. So, because I try to think about things, I think it's helpful when I'm thinking about human relations to think about them both biologically and historically. And when you do that, it sort of necessarily follows that, oh yeah, like this is going to be a massive, like human relations are going to be a massive power struggle. A struggle between rulers and ruled, or a struggle between nations, or a struggle between, factions in politics, a struggle between a dictator or a strong man rising up and taking control, and his struggle with, say, the old leaders of the leaders who were in power before him. Of course, making an analogy with Caesar, Julius Caesar versus the Senate. So, like, I accept that I'm not this, and other people are not just these benevolent beings, and these fully rational beings. And I accept that I can't entirely avoid submitting. So I've said recently, or I've characterized myself recently as a collectivist. And I think to be a collectivist, you have to acknowledge that the collective can have an authority over any one individual, and can therefore make the individual submit. It can't be you can't have a collective of purely individualistic people. But I don't want to get too far down the collectivist individualist rabbit hole, because I've had those conversations and it's not always clear how these terms are defined. But I guess maybe another way to put it would be authority or hierarchies aren't entirely escapable. And so that means that freedom, something that we Americans cherish above all else, perhaps, is limited in ways that might make us uncomfortable. We might not want that freedom to be limited in certain ways, but we probably can't escape that. However, I think you can still say that we can advocate for as much freedom and as much benevolence as is within the as is allowed by human nature and our material conditions. I don't think we can get fully away from morality. And because of that, I think I think we can use a moral framework to try to get us to a what we think is a better world. And then of course then the obvious objections. Well, what is morality? What is good and bad? What are better worlds? Aren't you just saying gibberish? Aren't you just making arbitrary statements that 1,001 people will disagree with? And I guess I've tried to run away from that in the past, but I mean, I'll accept the bait. Sure, morality is arbitrary. A better world is arbitrary. And my values are arbitrary. I can't give you a mathematical equation, or I can't run an experiment, and then collect data, hand it over to you and say, I have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that my intuitions are right and your intuitions are wrong, and therefore we should do what I think is right, and that will inevitably lead to better overall conditions. I can't do that. But I don't think that means, therefore, that moral conversations aren't worth having, or that moral conversations aren't inevitable and necessary, or that there's a place for morality in politics. So that's not really a refutation of the power thesis, but it is a added layer of complexity, which I don't think Gray goes into, and which I think is a necessary layer of complexity, insofar as most of human life, I guess, is arbitrary. I'm a literature snob, but I can't prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that my literary tastes are correct. I think they're correct, and I think they're meaningful to me, and I'll argue with people on that basis. So I think it's I think we can use reason and argumentation as a way of sort of expanding our horizons, and going beyond a purely power-driven view of politics and human relations in general. I mean, and there comes a point when I don't think people really consider, really have, really consider power to be the ultimate thing. I mean, when politicians go home at night and try to take time off, like go on vacation or something with their family, or they're hanging out with their friends or whatnot, are they really still engaging in power games, or are they attempting to get away from the power games for a while, and just be one among equals, and try to make life more pleasant for their loved ones. That's what's important to me. and I don't. And like I said, I think even politics, you can have moral conversations and conversations about values, even in the context of politics. Ultimately, this is a question about the value of argumentation, as well as a question about the value of, or as well as being a question about how in control people are of themselves. Because ultimately I do fall more in line with the people who say, yeah, we don't have control over ourselves. There is no free will. There is no self. And everything ultimately goes back to a causal chain of, or a chain of causes and effects, which first cause was the laws of physics. But I don't think that leads to, I don't think that has to lead to believing in a dictator who can do anything he wants because we're all just meat machines, and that doesn't have to lead to total nihilism about the world and about human affairs. And one reason I argue with people, and one reason I study philosophy, is to find that space where even if I'm not free, I can still find meaning and pleasure in existence. And I was about to say, even though I'm not free, I use philosophy to find a space where I can be free. But that's probably using words in an unhelpful way. I'm not a compatibilist. But yeah. So there are other objections as well, and in fact I didn't really get to a lot of Keegan's objections. So sorry about that, Keegan. He was talking about he was really saying something similar to what I was saying, but more in the political context, because he was saying, like, Caesar's friends and supporters, they actually cared about Caesar. They weren't just following him because of money and they weren't just following him because of what he could get them materially. They were following him because they thought he was a good leader, and he thought he would his rule would be a good thing for Rome. And I think Keegan was also upset with the idea that politics is a kind of about either being in power or not being in power. There was the video lacked a degree of nuance. That may have been intentional on Gray's part. I'm not sure. Maybe he thought if he were more nuanced, it would make the video too long and complicated and conceal his overall point. But that is definitely something to comment on when we're thinking about his arguments. And I guess in closing, when I think about policies that I want implemented, or when I think about the goals I want within the social sphere, if I were a politician, now I'm not a politician, partly for philosophical reasons, partly for more personal reasons, and I don't want to be a politician, but if I were, I'd be willing to play the game. I'd be willing to call people into my office, and I'd be willing to tell people how it is, and I'd be willing to be a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Cutthroat's the words that's coming to me. That's not really the word I want to use, but what I'm trying to say, I guess, is I would be willing to use power, and I would be willing to think about things in terms of power relations to get a goal accomplished. And I think that is probably necessary in politics. I think politics is, by definition, a little Machiavellian. So Gray's overall thesis is correct. I just think if you stay within that mindset, and if you focus on that insight too much, it can just lead to very bad outcomes, or it can lead to very destructive outcomes, and it takes away your dignity as a man. It takes away a kind of life which, all things considering, I would say is a better life. It prevents you from experiencing certain things. It prevents you from seeing seeing the beauty in certain aspects of life. But I've been talking far longer than I wanted to. This is going to be really fun to edit, so I'm looking forward to that. But thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. If you're watching, then obviously you know about my YouTube channel, The Philosopher. If you're not, now you are aware of it, and you can go to that channel to see vlogs and other videos I've made. I also co-host another podcast with my friend Matthew Keck called Beyond Talking Points, and it's more of a news, politics podcast. So if you want to check that out as well, I'd greatly appreciate it. Alrighty. With that said, take care.